kind of makes food one of the go-tos because it's such a perfect stage. Anything around giving, receiving, reciprocity, nourishment, need, all the elements are there for that to become like the perfect thing, even if it wasn't.
Look how special I am. Look how inadequate you are to make me feel this special. We know that narcissists do a lot of strange things. One of the weirdest ones that I'd noticed, and I guess maybe it's not the weirdest because there was a lot of weird moments in this relationship, but it was around food.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened right away, in which my ex loved to tell me that he had this favorite dish and that his mother would prepare it when he would come to visit her. And he would brag about it. I actually wasn't impressed because it had never heard of it, first of all, but it had items in it that I can't stand.
What was it?
It was, I can't remember all the what was in it. I think it was chicken, but what stood out was what I didn't like, and it was green olives. I can't stand green olives. But it was this kind of like one skillet concoction that got made, and he just would rave about how much he loved that his mother would make this dish. And when he visited, sure enough, she would make it, and he wouldn't even ask for it. She would just make it for him. And then he would look at me with that look at like, almost it reminded me of that poem where it says, little Jack Horner sat in the corner eating his pumpkin. Was it pumpkin pie or was it plum pie? He pulled in a thumb, pulled out a plum and said, oh, what a lucky boy am I? And I thought he had that look of like, oh, look how special I am. See, she remembered. She made this dish for me. And I just thought, geez. And it's interesting because I knew when I came home from college, my mom sometimes would make, my mom, by the way, didn't enjoy cooking. So it was a huge chore to her, not a labor of love. But sometimes she would make sure that something I really enjoyed would be there, but not always. I mean, it wasn't something I looked for. But I remember feeling like he wanted me to be jealous. That was the sense I had, that he wanted me to, there was a point he was making by telling this story. And I just found it odd. And there was one of many things in which he just sort of tried to show me how special he was and show me how loved, I think even more that, how loved he was.
I think food is such an example of that, isn't it? People show their love and affection, well, many of them do, through food. And I wonder, did he also know about what you didn't get and he was kind of tapping into that?
Maybe.
Food?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I met him, I was not savvy to this whole lay of the land.
Yeah.
And I was not aware of how incredibly astute they are to identifying our unmet needs and our biggest pain points. And yeah, I would say probably one of mine is I heard a lot as a kid, you're to be seen and not heard, which is in a way, sort of the opposite angle of this dynamic is you're invisible. You're to be invisible in this room. You're not to be where he's saying, look, I'm visible. She goes out and she makes a special dish for me. Where what was success in my home was to be a child who is obedient, dutiful, compliant, and quiet.
Yeah.
And I was to know my place. And so but here's the other thing is when I go back and look at the early stages of that relationship, I wrote him reams of letters. I gave him the playbook to carry. So it wouldn't have been very hard for him to extrapolated some of these things based upon, I may not told that story. I'm sure I never shared that saying I was being seen and not heard. I know I never told him that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he picked up some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we add into that, like all the cultural stuff that, and I'm sure it's not exclusive to women, but certainly it's massively women heavy, is all of the pressure around food and expressions of hunger, expressions of need. You know, we have such a shame around it anyway, culturally, that there's already that working in the favor of someone who wants to control and dominate, because that's kind of already in the psyche, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And food also then ties into body image as well. It's because what you eat will very much directly affect what kind of shape you're going to be in. He had odd eating behaviors, though. I mean, he had indulgences that were very specific and required. One of them was Japanese peanuts. I don't know if you've ever even heard of them before. I think they're peanuts, and they're very prevalent in Mexico. You can go in and buy them off the shelf. And they reminded me of a cross between baked soybean and peanuts. It doesn't taste exactly like a peanut, but it's similar, same kind of crunch. But he had to have them every night. I mean, it was just sort of and then a specific type of popcorn. There had to be a specific brand, I mean, to the point that he actually ruined a day of our honeymoon looking for that popcorn on a Caribbean island, which didn't have it, by the way. So he spent all sorts of taxi money looking for that popcorn.
Yeah, it's crazy because you kind of wonder how much of that is about the peanuts and how much of it is about just having to be demanding and finding reasons
Mm.
to, do you know what I mean? Like make
I do.
demands on the environment to sort of serve you or service you in some way, you know?
I also think it's a reflection. Because I don't think all types of cluster B personalities do this.
Mm.
I really don't. I wouldn't say this is something I've seen across the board, but I do think that it's more common in those with low impulse control that they lead with their senses. They're very hedonistic. I want what I want when I want it, and that's what it felt like to me. He was willing to disrupt and create chaos. Not only because it gave him control, and I think that certainly was also just to look, I'm dominant, I run the show here, but I also think it was an exercise of his saying, "I'm unhappy and I need this to fill some need of mine, some void that I want this specific thing." I mean, he would stop the whole show to go get these items.
Yeah. And I think some of it emerges, like you were talking about different types of abuser. I think it also emerges within the context of the relationship over time. So, what might start out as not being an issue for that particular abuser becomes one because of the impact that it has on the partner, if that
Mhm.
makes any sense. So it's
It
not
does.
something that would have been there at the beginning, but because it brings certain emotional responses, it becomes something that then gets kind of weaponized. Because I think so much of this is only any good in terms of manipulation or control or dominance because of the impact that it has, the emotional, psychological impact that it has on the partner and the necessary kind of adaptations that they absolutely have to make. I think it kind of makes food one of the go-tos because it's such a perfect stage, isn't it? Anything around giving, receiving, reciprocity, nourishment, need.
Yeah.
It's got like all the elements are there for that to become like the perfect thing, even if it wasn't maybe at the start.
Yeah, I agree, I agree. The other thing he did is he told a story about how his mother, when his father would come home, who was gone a lot, so he'd be gone for maybe weeks at a time, he'd come home, and mind you, this is a family has been living on a budget that he had, if I'm to believe my ex, which everything in my opinion is, that's a question mark. But I don't know why he would lie about this, and I also met her, and she confirmed some of the story, so I know that he was accurate about some of this.
Mhm.
And this to me, there was no benefit in him lying on this story, but the story was his father would leave a certain amount of money. I could see that. That sounds like a typical controlling person would do that. It, to me, is believable. But it wasn't enough to feed a family of 6 or a family of 7. They would run out. And by the end of the stay, whether it was a week or 2 weeks, they would be eating fish soup that had been watered down because there was nothing left.
Mhm.
And he would not eat. That's a common thing. They would serve this as sort of like almost like a appetite teaser in some nicer restaurants, and he wouldn't eat it because he said, "Listen, I that to me is a massive trigger, and
Mhm.
I hate it. I won't
Mhm.
eat it." And I
Mhm.
can understand based upon the story that
Mhm.
that fit.
Mhm.
But he would describe it. So here his father would come home and insist with the new fresh influx of money that he brought with him that he had to have his wife make homemade flour, not corn, tortillas, which made them by hand, which only father could eat. They weren't for the family.
Right.
And so what I found later on in when the relationship was breaking up and I was finding more evidence of what had been happened behind my back is the girlfriend, the mistress that he had, would send him pictures of her making him homemade tortillas, flour tortillas.
So it was kind of like a measure of
Yes.
love, femininity,
Yes.
affection,
I'm being
devotion,
served.
obedience, like tick,
Yes.
tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, I'm the king who comes home. I get now the royal meal made by the sweat of my partner's brow.
Yeah.
You know, it felt very dominant, but also I think there's also a coercive. I think it was his requirement of what this is what love looks like. It's by the sweat of your brow. It's by the denial of others for the sake of me. I mean, there's a lot that you can look into that to me, we made it a very sad story for that family that he's now replicating in his
Yeah.
own life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said coercive because I think what's so difficult for so many survivors is that well, I'll speak for myself, we catch ourselves kind of playing along with that dynamic, because when someone makes you feel like, oh my God, you're so amazing, you just made me tortillas from scratch, because at the beginning of the relationship, that's what it's like, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, no one's ever done that for me. No one's ever made me tortillas from scratch. You are the most amazing woman in the world. That becomes like the bar that's set. And certainly catch ourselves kind of going along with that to make sure that we maintain that bar. But then, of course, because it is the perfect setting for intermittent reinforcement, the next time you make the tortillas, the reaction is a bit less than, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they weren't so good this time, but they were okay. And internally, before you know it, there's this whole anxiety around getting it right, doing it like the first time where they were perfect, and all of that kind of shenanigans that you start doing totally without really consciously thinking about it.
And you're inadvertently, because of the story that's been shared, also competing with the story, the legend. Because it is sort of the legend, And in fact, I can imagine him if I was I never attempted to do that, by the way. I never made them. I don't even know how to make them.
Nope, I've never made a
I
tortilla in my life, just
I
so
know.
you
To
know.
me, I quickly said, "I'm not cooking. That's just not something I'm gonna be doing here."
I didn't do that.
That was my opt out, by the way.
Yeah,
I wouldn't engage. I
yeah.
did a little bit, and it got weaponized really fast and very, very nasty, and I learned that's why that was smart to have opt out, that I'd sensed that this was a landmine. I just didn't really wanna try to navigate that complex field. But I can imagine that if I made them or if she makes them, he would say, "Not quite my mom's or close
Mhm,
to my mom's,"
mhm,
bringing in this legend story that
mhm.
he's created.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, did you experience something similar around any of this with any of the relationships you've been in?
I have definitely experienced a lot of meal times being a way where it was kind of like regulation of the relationship or an opportunity to sort of show something, to sort of impress or to please, and a real sense of disappointment. I had one partner who it wouldn't make any difference what effort I made. There was no comment, there was no appreciation, there was just nothing coming back at all, which I'm sure you'll get partly is problematic because then you start to feel like, well, maybe I'm just being, egotistical for wanting anything.
Yeah.
But one, I think, pretty narcissistic partner that I had many years later was always in a kind of competition around food. Food was definitely something where there was a kind of looking at what you've got, looking at what I've got, who's got more, are you going to eat that? Or you've eaten that really quickly. And lots of comment about me
Mm.
having an appetite, being hungry, lots of kind of ostentatious consumption of food, and almost in a kind of, I don't know, in a sort of gloating way, really, really possessive around food. And I'd never ever experienced anything like that before. And it reminded me of your story about little Jack Horner. There was a little kind
Mhm.
of na na ni na na, I've got this, you haven't got
Mm.
it sort of thing. Very, very kind of juvenile.
Right, I was thinking of the root of jealousy,
Yeah.
that's the it's just being pervasive through that of, I'm special because 'cause I'm favored if I have it, but I'm also competing with everyone around me to make sure nobody else comes ahead
Yeah,
of me.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I think food, particularly for very narcissistic mothers and their sons, I think food is a real kind of, well, you talked about it, that kind of favoring and making sure that there's an indulgence and a sense of you have whatever you want, it's fine. But I think the most painful that I experienced was in being asked to make things specifically because I think the person enjoyed me going to a lot of effort and then kind of either being sort of disgruntled by it, not happy about it. I found that really, really devastating because I think at that point I'd started to realize that this was intentional. Like it was being kind of set a task just to do it. And
Yeah, it almost sounds sadistic. Do you think there's some sadism behind it?
yeah, probably. Yeah, I found that really upsetting. Like I said, I think the whole idea of food, it's the most basic human need. And it's one of the things that I think is so easily a battleground or a stage for abusive dynamics. because there's so much emotion and it carries so much weight
Yeah.
for both people.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to infancy. I mean, it's the first way outside of the mother that the child's sustained. And we don't talk about this. I never have heard conversations, but when the baby and you are, especially if you're nursing, but even with a bottle, it's all about the right kind of nipple and the right kind of flow. There's a process that happens between you and the infant. You're
Mhm.
either drowning them, or you're are frustrating them because it's not fast enough, or they refuse outright. So there's kind of like three alternatives that I'm thinking off the top of my head that happens in these relationships. So
Mhm.
one is sort of this kind of this overwhelm, enmeshed, suffocating experience. The other is just rigid refusal to participate. And then the third is just that it's a frustrate you that you're not competent enough. You're not satisfying enough. And I see that play out in these relationships. It's like that dynamic never really got solved well.
Mhm.
And they're still managing it as if it's happening today between adults.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking of another thing that he did right away when the second date with him, and it irritated me. And I'll tell you, it's now something I don't want anyone ever doing to me. I found it so invasive, and that is he'd want to feed me food. And I don't want somebody like having me open my mouth and try to feed me food.
Oh, it's like what you like in the movies where they do that
Yes.
sort of
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Which is partly
Mm.
probably why he did it, was because he watched it and thought,
Had like an
"Oh, that
image
looks
in his
so
mind.
romantic," which really, I'll tell you, it's not. As a person receiving it, it doesn't feel. I mean, first of all, I'm worried you're going to spill it on me.
Mhm.
I don't know how hot it is. It may be too big, and I can't. Again, all the things I just laid out around the infant's battle with milk is the experience I had with this effort to try to feed me food.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet, but you think about it, this is again, the food becomes the object of control. At the same time, it's also the source of sustenance. It's a very complex dynamic.
Yeah, it really is complex. And I think what happens is that a lot of us kind of dissociate. And I don't mean like literally dissociate as in we're sort of out of our bodies, but I think we I certainly detached from physical needs completely because there's
Mm.
so much conflict and tension and stress that you kind of just go like a bit like the mother with the baby who cannot be pleased, who can't
Yeah,
be satisfied or fed in the right way. Not pleased, but you know what I mean? Who can't
yeah.
be settled. You kind of have to go, okay, right, I'm not going to keep feeling this. We're just going to do it. We'll just go through the motions. And I think there's so much dissociation to body, appetite, hunger, literally hunger. Or conversely, there can be a kind of coping through eating to try and get some of the emotional sustenance, well, the physical, at least, sustenance to make up for the lack of the emotional. I
Oh,
think
I
it can go
agree.
either
I
way.
agree. Yeah, yeah. That was like when you said that, I just like, oh, she's. You're right. Because really, if you look back to all our stories, what we've shared so far, what we've been sharing is this. They don't mean it to be hostile, but there's a thread of hostility in it. That's what you sense this kind of angry, gloating, or not good enough message that's threaded through this of, look how special I am. Look how inadequate you are to make me feel this special the way that can do for myself, or my mother or some other perfect idealized person can do for me. It creates this sense of you're an inadequate source of connection. And yet they hold out the hope, almost like put the bar out there that you think you could somehow try to get over it so that you can be successful and feel good.
Mhm.
Here's a perfect example how it happened. Like I said, I rarely cooked, but one of the dishes that I personally love a lot is my homemade lasagna. And it's not that hard. I don't go to the whole effort of making homemade sauce and homemade noodles, but I do put it together, and I like the way that I put it together. So anyway, I had made it once for him and it was fine. Nobody commented a lot, but I planned to do it again with his mom there when she was living with us. And they had just come home from seeing a doctor, and I had it getting out of the oven. And she let me know that they had already brought in, they knew I was making this, by the way. This was a text conversation and it was understood. So I was timing it correctly. So when they got in, we could eat. And she announced at the doorway as they walked in that they wouldn't be eating it. They had other plans
Wow.
as I'm pulling the hot lasagna out of the oven.
What did they give any reason for that?
And there were no reason. And I could tell she was pleased. She's pleased at letting me go, just like you shared, going to all those efforts for nothing. that she's pleased to let me know that I was no better than the house servant or less than, and they had just changed their mind.
And that was his mum,
Mhm.
which I don't know, feels like he'll eat my food, he won't eat your food, or I won't eat your food. He might, but I won't. There's
Yes.
that competitive thing going
Yes, in
on.
fact, here's another thing she started to do. We got a juicer. It came with one of the properties we bought happened to have furniture in it, and we turned it into a vacation rental, and so we took the furniture and stuff out of it that didn't belong for guests, and one of them was a really nice juicer, really, really upscale juicer, and I'm not a big juice person, but he loved his green juice, loved it, and she started making it for him in the morning, and only enough for him, and then let me know that she was making juice for him every morning. And in fact, one day I think I did something and didn't quite clean it up right, and she chewed me out via through him that I didn't do a good job cleaning that juicer. When I said, I felt like it belongs to me, and if I want to damage
Wow.
it, I will. It's,
Wow.
you didn't pay for it; it isn't yours. Who cares? Yeah,
How
so
horrible. Did you say
yeah,
anything?
did I say anything?
Yeah, about the Jew
No, I didn't. Well, I didn't speak Spanish that fluently, so
okay.
I couldn't have, but but I knew it was a way to hurt me, and I just refused to play the game. So I just refused to care. She was really trying to stir problems at but he was, it's interesting because what him and her had issues, although they didn't play that out in front of me. I just knew privately he shared that he had issues
Mhm.
with her, but she was actively trying to create problems near that later part of our marriage, and it got pretty ugly. So, but my stance was no. Her issue is not with me. That's what I would say to him. Her issue is not with me. It's with you. I'm
Mhm.
not involved with this. I have nothing to do with this. I don't even talk to her. Her issues with you.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I
I
wonder
just
how frustrated he might have been at the fact that you weren't playing the game in terms of food specifically. You know what I mean? That you,
yeah.
for some reason, you'd seen early enough that this was going to be like a hot potato and you just weren't going to get into that arena. I wonder what that meant in terms of what did he then have to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because, in fact, I just sat with my members in the Toxic Free Relationship Club, and we were talking about power and control last night.
Mm.
And from the standpoint of this is a pattern. This isn't specific to you. This is a pattern they run out for everybody, and
Mhm.
they all do the same thing. The research has
Mhm.
borne that out. I mean, I was just sharing with you before we went on air that Dina McMillan did this massive study of predatory behavior and found out that it didn't matter based on age, gender, ethnicity, race, which country. It didn't matter that the playbook is always the same. And so it's interesting that sometimes I could pick up the playbook being implemented, and there are times that I couldn't. And for
Mhm.
some reason, when somebody starts to tout to me how special they have it and how wonderful it is, and sort of this gloating, special behavior, it so turns me off that
Mhm.
I just back away and I'm disinterested. I don't engage in it.
Mhm.
So thankfully, this was where this was happening and it just
Yeah.
wasn't a big trigger. But
Yeah.
yet, if you look at other places, like the way he treated me around buying clothes, or or even around our sexual intimacy, I was deeply invested in it. It really, really hurt. But this was one I wouldn't engage. I didn't care. I was completely. It wasn't even that I was detached. Just
Mhm.
it wasn't I was dissociating. I just really didn't care. I thought it was silliness to
But
me.
that's a really good point because I never thought of that. Like the fact that at some level, the other things, you did have an urge, at some part of you wanted to heal something, or, the whole repetition thing.
Yeah.
There was some part of you with a vested interest in getting something right. But
Yes.
with food, you couldn't care less. It just
Right.
wasn't something that you had this urge to, do you know what I mean? To like
I do
heal
know.
something in yourself about
No,
it.
yeah, and it's interesting because you and I didn't even talk about our food history, but mine is that I started cooking for my family when I was really young. I lived on a working farm. My mother worked outside the home, was gone. We had hired hands on the farm who needed to be fed during the middle of the day. Our biggest meal was not lunch, it was called dinner. Lunch was dinner and dinner
Yeah,
was supper.
yeah.
So we had dinner at midday. It was a big deal, and I tended to be cooking it. So here I am, a middle schooler, and I'm making no, I'm not talking it was complicated. It was like often hamburger helper and stuff like that, but but I'm feeding a table full of people with Hamburger Helper or whatever else that it was.
Mhm.
And I don't know. Food can be a love language for me, but it also is just a part of work,
It's
and I
just
don't have a lot of emotional investment in it.
you eat to live.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And that sounds very much about eating to live. Like we're eating because we have to survive, and that's
Yeah,
it.
we're hungry. It's cold out. We're working hard. We got to get back out. You want something quick and nourishing that's filling. So that was the big focus. It wasn't about pleasure. It was about nourishment and
Yeah.
filling.
Yeah.
And thankfully so when I heard him share early on about this story about his mother, I thought, oh, not entering into this. This is a trap and I'm not stepping into this.
Yeah. You recognized it at some level.
Yeah, I wish I could
Yeah.
seen that everywhere else on everything else, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, my food history has really worked against me. Because I've always sort of had my mum was very, very slim, always made sure that she was. And I think in the 80s, certainly where I lived, there was a kind of, I think a lot of us experienced this, being bigger, even having curves was just thought of as like, do you remember like the whole Jane Fonda nonsense and all
Oh,
of
yeah,
that
and for
stuff?
me, it was
That was,
Twiggy because
yeah,
I'm 10 years older than you,
yeah.
so yeah.
So that whole kind of self-deprivation, I mean, I can remember feeling embarrassed to eat in front of someone else because my eating was like kind of shameful, the fact that you even needed to eat at all. And so
Wow.
always been working against that. And I think for a couple of abusive men, that's been a very vulnerable wound around pleasing and going without with a big smile on my face.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do,
but
I
literally
do.
dissociated from any physical sensations at all.
That's a whole nother that's a fascinating conversation we should follow up on, is what does thinness and the body preoccupation serve for these individuals? Because I do think in fact, I know that some people who study cults talk about that, the
Yeah.
needing the thin woman. In fact, on our first date, Lynn, the way that it ended is we went to a steakhouse and I ordered ribs and I ordered a full rack of ribs and I ate them. And he looked at me and said, "Wow, you really enjoy eating." And I said, "Yes, I do."
I love
Again, I'm like, "I know what you're doing here, and I
and
don't care, and
yeah.
I'm not being influenced by this."
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing because that's so the opposite of the other ways that I know you felt around him.
Yeah,
But there's
yeah,
something about that bit he just couldn't get through.
I
Whereas
know.
for me, that would have been like lighting a shame
Mm,
touch paper. It's
yeah,
commenting on, wow, God, you can eat. I mean, the shame and the self-loathing would have been absolutely monumental. So it's always been about control, which
mm,
I think we talked about this before. The abuser's best friend is our own internal controller. So they just
yes,
kind of team up,
they do, they do. So I would love to jump over to the podcast extra, and let's talk about if this is happening to you, what are some steps that you can take to kick the control back, to start to disengage from the struggle? Because that is the struggle here. We get so wrapped up in it that it becomes what controls us. So thank you so much for this conversation. It
It's
really
great
is
to talk to
interesting.
you. It's really good to talk to you.
It's 2 a.m. again, and you're replaying that whole conversation over, and you're wondering to yourself, was it really that bad, or maybe I'm just being dramatic? So you start to draft that I'm sorry text again, because the guilt that you're feeling or the confusion you're experiencing is just unbearable. And you know this loop because you've been there before, but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I'm a retired psychologist, and for 25 years, I've been helping people untangle exactly what toxic relationships do to your mind, how they create the confusion, the self-doubt, and that trauma bond that keeps pulling you back in. Here's the truth. Recovery isn't about getting more information. It's about having the right support in the exact moment you need it. That's why I've created Reclaim You. It's a private, always available coaching app built from my work and my content, organized into an extensive library that you can actually use when you're triggered. Inside it, you'll get 5-minute lessons when your brain can't handle a deep dive, check-ins that meet you exactly where you are, whether you're feeling strong, shattered, or numb, boundary scripts that help you say no without over-explaining, grounding tools that work fast when you're activated, and progress tracking so you can see proof you're healing even on days when it feels like you're not. There's no appointments, no waiting, no judgment, just practical support right when you need it. Reclaim you, real help in real time, right in your pocket. And it's a coaching support, not therapy or emergency care. Learn more at studio.com/Dr. Kerry. So start your healing today and reclaim you.